Star Wars is riddled with plot holes, and they span across the entire saga. Some of them are rather minor, but some of them are just kinda distracting, especially when we get to the sequels. Oh man, the sequels. But all in due time, let's start with the original trilogy. During an intimate moment between Luke and Leia on Endor, Leia takes a moment to connect with Luke. At this point, Luke already knows that she's his sister, but she has no idea about her true family. He asks her what she remembers about her mother, and she says that she doesn't remember much, aside from the fact that she was kind, but sad. In Revenge of the Sith, the only bit of contact that the twins have with their mother Padme Amidala is when Padme takes a moment to look at their faces and name them before dying. In a sense, Leia could have some long-buried imprint memory of her birth, but in reality, it's more likely that she doesn't remember Padme at all. In the Obi-Wan series, we see how Leia was raised on Alderaan, and it's clear that she had a very strong memory of the Organas, so it's likely that she wasn't talking about them. Leia's memory of Padme makes no sense, so it makes you wonder, who is she actually remembering in this instance when she talks with Luke? To go along with questionable theories on the twins' upbringing, Obi-Wan takes Luke back to Tatooine to live with Owen and Beru Lars. When Obi-Wan decides to take Luke back to Vader's home planet, he says that it's to live with his only remaining biological relatives, but it's clear that this would be one of the few places that Vader would check. All of Vader's connections had died or been destroyed aside from his stepbrother Owen Lars on the homestead that his mother Shmi had decided to marry on. Vader was known for returning to key locations to try and unlock secrets, such as when he returned to Naboo to try and find clues to Padme's fate and to find a strong connection. But Tatooine seemed to be off limits for some reason. What makes it a little more unbelievable is the fact that Obi-Wan not only returned him to the only relatives he had, but he let him keep the Skywalker name. Skywalker was not a common household name, and since Shmi and Anakin were the only ones known to have this name, it kinda defeats the purpose of hiding Luke if he gave him the easiest way to get tracked. Then, when Obi-Wan finally reveals the Jedi world to Luke and tries to convince him to go on Dagobah to train under Yoda, he says that Yoda was the Jedi Master who instructed him. While Yoda did provide advice and counsel to him during his Jedi years before his exile, he was never his personal master. Yoda's last apprentice around the Clone Wars era was actually Darth Tyrannus, aka Count Dooku. Count Dooku in turn trained Qui-Gon Jinn as his apprentice, and Qui-Gon Jinn ended up taking Obi-Wan as his apprentice. In a long line of Jedi knowledge being passed down, technically Yoda helped with Obi-Wan's training, but to be named his actual master would be a falsehood. At the time of writing, it's safe to assume that Qui-Gon was not part of the original Star Wars blueprint, but this means that they openly created a plot hole by adding in the hierarchy that happened between Yoda and Obi-Wan's time. Well, the General has been making additions to his collection for several years now, and if you're anything like me, you've probably imagined what it could be like to own a saber yourself. So that's why I started my own store called Stickman Sabers, with a singular goal in mind. Make sabers that look amazing, being inspired by iconic designs, but specifically built to actually duel with. No worrying about babying them, just pick them up and go ham. They're equipped with state-of-the-art pixel technology, giving off an incredibly bright light that will light up the darkest rooms out there. And obviously have that iconic hum, just feels right the moment you switch it on. And for a limited time, if you pick a collector's saber up, you'll also get 2 combat sabers for free. So, if you ever thought about starting your own collection, this is a pretty good place to start. Links in the description, and now, let's get back to the video. The scanning technology of the Empire opens up a few holes that never get addressed. At the very beginning of our journey into a galaxy far, far away, Imperial officers decide not to shoot the escape pod that is carrying R2-D2 and C-3PO, because there are no life forms on board. No one said that life forms were going to be carrying the plans, and for all they knew, the plans were put on a holopad and sent to the surface in the escape pod for anyone to find with directions on delivering them to rebels. Better yet, their technology should be able to scan the escape pod and detect the droids since they were active. If they were shut down, they wouldn't have been able to pick up any signals, but droids are shut down many other times to avoid getting detected by scanners. Also, there's no way that a single blast from their turret would be too costly for the Empire. It would have taken them nothing to actually shoot the pod and any other debris that might be flying around. As for the scanning capabilities, they were able to scan for life forms with this Star Destroyer to see that there were none, but the Death Star never scanned the Millennium Falcon to find several people and a Wookiee hiding under the floorboards once they pulled it in with their tractor beam. You would think that the Death Star would be equipped with the same scanning technology that the Star Destroyer had, if not better ones, and they would have been able to detect that there were at least life forms present somewhere in the ship. It also makes no sense to pull the Millennium Falcon onto their secret weapon instead of just destroying it in their tractor beam. While Vader wanted to confront Obi-Wan face to face, he could have still completed his mission of destroying his old master by blowing up the Millennium Falcon, and this would have been much more effective. In fact, he had no idea that Obi-Wan was present until he felt his presence wandering the Death Star. With that in mind, this hunk of junk was nothing more than a ship that wandered into their space, and firing on it made much more sense than pulling it in. On top of all of that, when Obi-Wan runs into R2-D2 and C-3PO on Tatooine, he claims to have no memory of ever owning a droid, but that's not the real issue. The real issue is the fact that he doesn't remember ever dealing with these specific droids in the past. Obi-Wan spent most of the Clone Wars with Anakin right by his side, and Anakin hardly ever went anywhere without R2-D2 by his side. Obi-Wan and R2 famously interact with each other throughout the prequels on multiple occasions. Not only does he not remember the spicy comments made by R2-D2 during their time in the Clone Wars, but C-3PO was Padme's personal droid for the final years of her life, and he was very present in the way of Senate comings and goings. Obi-Wan knew C-3PO by name during the Clone Wars as he was sent on many diplomatic missions that required a Jedi escort or Jedi intervention. It could be said that Obi-Wan had selective memory in his older age, but he had no problem remembering other key moments of the Clone Wars, so this shouldn't have been that much of a stretch. Vader has some plot holes of his own in the original trilogy, but one of these questions his Force powers. Vader spends quite a bit of time face-to-face with Princess Leia before Luke and the others save her from the Death Star. We later find out that she's quite strong in the Force and is a direct descendant of Vader, so how is Vader not able to sense her abilities? Vader's ability to sense Force-sensitive beings is amazing, as he's able to sense Obi-Wan when he boards the Death Star. He's able to sense Luke in his X-Wing, and he's able to sense Luke on a completely different ship as the rebels fly to the forest moon of Endor. So why isn't he able to sense Leia's abilities or her connection to him? No one seems to feel that Leia is Force-sensitive, and she doesn't start training in the ways of the Force until after the Empire is defeated. This doesn't mean that she isn't exuding Force energy before that, though. Anyone who's Force-sensitive is able to feel it or show it without even trying at times. But Vader is completely blind to her potential even when he puts his hands on her on the Death Star. It wasn't until he probed Luke's mind while he was prying into his emotions that he sensed that Luke had a sister, and even then, her identity seemed to stay a mystery to Vader. The Force seems to be rather confusing for everyone in the original trilogy though, as Luke seems to forget that he can use it. While his training on Dagobah proved to be too much at the time for him, by the time he gets to Jabba's palace in Return of the Jedi, he's supposed to be much more attuned to his powers. He's even able to Jedi mind trick Bib Fortuna and Force choke the Gamorrean guards. Force choking is supposed to be a power that only the strongest of Sith can achieve, so why does he consistently forget that he can lift things with the Force? One of the first beasts that Luke faces at Jabba's palace is the Rancor in the pit. Luke takes the time to grab a rather hefty stone to chuck it at the door controls, but this would have been no problem for him to levitate it and throw it with the Force. Better yet, Luke is seen struggling to pull Vader's body onto the Imperial shuttle when the second Death Star is exploding. While Vader's whole body might have been a stretch for him to levitate for that long in a controlled manner, he could have easily used the Force to empower his own body a little more. We've never seen a Jedi struggle as much as Luke did when he was pulling Vader's dead body into the shuttle. Whether this was due to inexperience, a lack of ability, or exhaustion from his fight with Vader and Sidious's lightning is unknown, but Luke had quite a few missed opportunities to use the Force. Going back a little bit, we know that the Sith are supposed to live by a creed, the Rule of Two. There's always supposed to be a master and an apprentice, so why are there so many dark side users? By the time of the Galactic Empire, the main evil is Sidious as the master and Vader as the apprentice. But prior to this, all of Sidious's apprentices had apprentices of their own. Since Sidious was consistently known to be the true master of the Sith, that position never changed. But according to the Rule of Two, the only approved apprentices should have been Darth Maul, Count Dooku, and Anakin. Maul hit a rather questionable gray area as he was thought to be dead, so Sidious moved on to Dooku, but Maul ended up thriving after he rebuilt himself and took on his own apprentice in the form of his brother Savage Opress. On top of that, he even mentioned Ezra Bridger for a brief moment while failing to make him his true apprentice. None of that should have been allowed in the eyes of the Sith though, and Dooku was even worse. Dooku took on Asajj Ventress as a dark side assassin and apprentice during the Clone Wars, and she was only replaced after Sidious feared that she might be a threat from becoming too powerful. Sidious actually saw her as a violation of the Rule of Two, since he believed Dooku was training her to overthrow him. After Ventress was cast aside and escaped, Dooku took on Savage as his own apprentice before he went to fight alongside Maul. For a brief moment, Dooku also trained Quinlan Vos in the ways of the dark side, but this was only during an undercover mission. Either way, Dooku consistently employed or trained dark side users who would act as his apprentice, which was a violation of the Rule of Two. Vader had even more apprentices than all of the others combined. His most famous one was Galen Marek, aka Starkiller, who he trained in secret to help him overthrow the Emperor, but he ended up betraying him in the end. After that failed, he tried to take a clone of Starkiller as his apprentice. In the end, he ended up with close to 13 apprentices who violated the Rule of Two. With the Rule of Two, the apprentice must overthrow the master, then take on an apprentice of their own. But this is never the case, as each of them took on apprentices first to accomplish their goals or attempt to overthrow Palpatine. They broke their own rule. When looking at the Jedi, it's not often that a Force ability simply disappears, but one key power seen in the beginning of Phantom Menace is never seen again in some of the most crucial moments. When Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon are aboard the Trade Federation ship, they end up confronting droidekas, but in order to escape, they have to use a Force speed ability. They dash away in the blink of an eye, and they're way down the long corridor before the droidekas even turn to pursue them. So why isn't this power used later on? When Darth Maul faces off against Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, they find themselves in a corridor with energy fields separating them, and Obi-Wan is really far behind the other two. Considering this is a Sith Lord and he's been able to hold off both of them, a one-on-one seems extremely dangerous. This would be the perfect time to use the ability to catch up to them before getting trapped behind a force field where Obi-Wan had to watch his beloved master get skewered. In the live-action films, there are only two other moments when something similar to this is used. Once, when Sidious takes on all the Jedi who came to arrest him, and he uses a small amount of force speed to kill 3 of them in a matter of seconds. The speed burst is nothing compared to what the Jedi used on the Trade Federation ship, but it's something. Later on, when Luke is fighting Vader on Cloud City, he ends up seemingly trapped in the Carbonite Pit, but he uses force speed along with his leap to burst out of the pit before he could be frozen. While these are definitely useful moments, it doesn't justify the complete lack of the ability in other key moments. One reason why the Jedi might not use this as often is the fact that it leaves the user vulnerable after they use it. So while this is a great tactic for escaping, it's not the most effective means of combat, but that doesn't mean there weren't plenty of safe times to use it. One character who held quite a few plot holes of his own was R2-D2, the droid that could take on an army and live to tell the tale. In the prequels, R2-D2 is seen with many upgrades that never reappear in later timelines, and one of these key upgrades is his ability to fly. In the droid factories on Geonosis, R2 uses rocket boosters to fly around the machinery, and he's seen using his boosters yet again in Revenge of the Sith while destroying super battle droids he's doused in oil. So, where were these upgrades when he fell in the swamp on Dagobah? Where were these upgrades when he pushed C-3PO off of Jabba's barge and got stuck in the sand on Tatooine? Of course, the films were made out of order, but the inability to explain why he would lose this function means that he canonically still had them in the original trilogy. Better yet, why wasn't R2's mind wiped after Luke and Leia were born? The entire plan of hiding Luke and Leia rested on everyone's ability to keep a secret, and they took the time to wipe C-3PO's mind. Obviously, C-3PO was a protocol droid who was designed to communicate and interact with people from any background. But R2 held so many more secrets since he was included on many dangerous missions during the Clone Wars. On top of that, he witnessed Anakin's deeds on Mustafar, which included the incident with Padme and Obi-Wan. If his mind hadn't been wiped, then what's stopping him from spreading the gospel of the Clone Wars to everyone around him? Better yet, why doesn't he spill all of the beans when he meets Luke and Ben on Tatooine? R2 knows who old Ben Kenobi really is, yet he leaves him to flounder in his old man memory to figure out who the droids really are. On top of that, R2 could have revealed Luke's father to him at any point in time before Luke found out on Cloud City, but the mouthy little astromech droid decided to keep his mouth shut. When it comes to sequel trilogy plot holes, nothing seems to ruffle people's feathers more. One key plot hole is the ancient Sith dagger that was used as a compass. According to lore, there was only one created a long time ago, and it pointed the wielder to the Sith world of Exegol. Considering the fact that it was supposed to be from ancient times, there's no way that it could use a modern event as a waypoint. In Rise of Skywalker, the dagger was found by Rey when she searched the remains of Ochi the Bestoon on Pasaana, and the ridges on it just so happened to line up with the wreckage of the second Death Star, which had landed on the ocean moon of Kef Bir. The second Death Star had crashed only 30 years prior to the events of the film, so how did she happen to come across an ancient blade that used this wreckage to point her to a wayfinder? It was later retconned to be not so ancient. While this was originally a huge plot hole in the main entry film, the novel Shadow of the Sith made an attempt to bridge gaps in the storyline to fix this hole. Even though the blade was rather old, it wasn't ancient and had been recently reforged and inscribed by Sith cultists. This is how the second Death Star crash was used as a compass for anyone using it. The blade itself was used to kill Rey's parents by the bounty hunter Ochi, and the grooves notched in the dagger were described to feel freshly machined. This makes it very clear that the instructions were forged on it post-Endor time, but this was only fixed by the novel, which came after the film came out. Going back just a little bit, you'll find another plot hole in Rise of Skywalker when TIE fighters are seen following Poe as he lightspeed skips in the Millennium Falcon. This actually messes with two established lores, as TIE fighters don't have lightspeed capabilities, and only one ship has ever had the ability to track ships through lightspeed, and it was destroyed. TIE fighters were easy and cheap for the Empire to make due to the fact that they weren't equipped with shields or a hyperdrive. TIE fighters were only able to fly using sunlight engines, and they had to be carried by larger vessels to cross the galaxy or go anywhere that required lightspeed. So why were they able to jump multiple times while following closely behind the Millennium Falcon? It turns out that the First Order decided not to skimp on these upgrades, and it was later revealed that they were actually equipped with shields and hyperdrives. But what about lightspeed tracking? In The Last Jedi, everyone knew that ships couldn't be tracked through lightspeed, and this made it a big deal when the Supremacy, Snoke's mega-class Star Destroyer, was able to track the Rebels through hyperspace. This ship was able to do so by utilizing technology that used advanced, large-scale computer algorithms that calculated trajectory instead of using an actual physical beacon. The equipment was so large that it took up an entire room on the mega-class Star Destroyer. When the TIE fighters' lightspeed skipped with Poe, they weren't putting in their own calculations, and they weren't piggybacking off of the back of the Falcon. They were actively tracking them and following with only seconds to calculate and input the coordinates. The only way they could have done this is if they had the same tech that the Supremacy had, but there's no way that the First Order was able to research and recreate this tech in such a small space so quickly. On the other side of things, C-3PO is once again the target of a huge plot hole. When C-3PO is given the task of translating the Sith language inscribed on the Sith dagger, he's able to read it, but he's restricted from speaking it out loud. According to C-3PO, built-in programming from the Old Republic banned him from speaking it, as that was standard firmware for protocol droids. The only problem is the fact that C-3PO wasn't built as a standard protocol droid. C-3PO wasn't built in a factory like other protocol droids, and he wasn't owned by Republic figures in the beginning. He was made in Anakin's bedroom when he was 9 years old, and a slave on Tatooine. He was programmed by the 9-year-old using his own knowledge and whatever he could scrounge up from broken droids he found in junk heaps on Tatooine. While he could have picked up the mind of an Old Republic droid, it's highly unlikely that the firmware was built into C-3PO since he was built from almost scratch. One might argue that he got an update when he was employed by Padme and the Republic Senate, but he was famously kept away from droid factories who would alter his mind or personality as he held classified information that couldn't be shared. After Padme's death, C-3PO's mind was wiped, but this act wouldn't alter his initial firmware programming, considering the fact that Anakin was on a planet in the Outer Rim which wasn't under Republic control. There's no way that he would have felt obligated to create C-3PO in a way that would follow ancient restrictions. In The Last Jedi, Vice Admiral Holdo uses a maneuver that is so effective that it brought the Supremacy down. She used their flagship as a hyperspace missile, and while this could technically be possible physically, why wasn't it ever used before? This definitely breaks the established rules of warfare that were established from the beginning. And if this was really possible, there are 1,000 other times in history where this would have been used to completely end wars. There's no way that Holdo was the first person to think that they could use their ship as a missile, and we've even seen other ships being used as battering rams and explosives to breach the hull or life support of larger ships. If this was possible, it's very likely that this could have been used to destroy the Death Star had the Rebels known about it earlier, or it could have been used to bring down Darth Vader's Star Destroyer on multiple occasions. Another plot hole that is never addressed but could be left up to the mysticism of the world is how Maz Kanata was able to obtain Luke's original lightsaber. When asked about it, she says, "A good question, for another time," but another time never comes. When we think back to what happened with Luke's lightsaber, it actually goes much further back, as it was once Anakin Skywalker's lightsaber. Obi-Wan grabbed it from the banks of Mustafar after defeating Anakin, and he held onto it for many years until Luke was old enough to take up his place. Luke used this lightsaber for a short stint during A New Hope, but he really utilized it during his training on Dagobah. It was during his duel with Vader on Cloud City that it was lost forever. Or so everyone thought. After Luke's hand was cut off by Vader, his hand, along with the lightsaber, fell down from the platform. Theories are that a collector just happened to come across it after some time, but the most likely theory is that an Ugnaught scavenged it from a vent on Bespin, though none of these theories have been confirmed. Either way, it really doesn't explain how Maz Kanata came to obtain it, and it also makes no sense how she understood the importance of the weapon or the heritage it held. The only people who knew that the lightsaber belonged to Luke were Leia, Han, Chewie, Vader, Obi-Wan, and Luke himself. Considering the fact that Han was just as surprised by the fact that she had the lightsaber, it's safe to assume that he never conversed with her about the old days or Luke's abilities. So, Maz's secrets remain a mystery, with the only logical explanation being plot armor for the sake of the story. Oh, and again, for a limited time, every Stickman saber purchase comes with 2 additional combat sabers, so you're more than ready for your own duels. If that sounds like something you'd want to look into, the link's in the description.